Welcome to the Morning Smiles podcast. In these episodes, we discuss with other business professionals about the world of making conscious decisions, especially in social settings like conferences and work events. Morning Smiles isn't just a podcast. It's a movement from the visionaries behind Sober Life Rocks. Join us for stories and discussions that celebrate conscious living and, most importantly, keeping you smiling. Whether you're on your commute to or from work or just seeking some inspiration, we're here to make sure that you have a bright part of your day. So stay positive and remember, making the right choices today means smiling tomorrow. We are on this journey together with Morning Smiles.
Good morning. I'm Margy Schaller, co-founder of Sober Life Rocks and the host of the Morning Smiles podcast. I want to welcome you today and let you know that you are not alone. How many of you have been in those situations where the alcohol-forward events at conferences or business parties have made you feel isolated? I know I have. But through this podcast, we're changing that narrative. We are here to create a community where individuals like you who choose not to drink or drink less can find camaraderie, support, and practical advice. Let me introduce you to my business partner and guest, Laura Nelson. Now, I thought the challenges I faced at meetings were unique, but now I know that these are shared by many of you. So let's get the conversation started. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. It's good to be on our own podcast. This is fun.
I know. And I'm so excited to have you as my first guest.
Awesome. I'm excited to be here.
So similarly to our first one, I want to just find out about you and your story and what it's been like for you. Would you be willing to share anything about your drinking days in the past?
Yes. So that's kind of the reason we're all here. If you're listening, you're probably going to hear similar stories from lots of people. Let's see. So my journey started, in high school, the typical, let's go have a drink or whatever. And I drank all through high school, all through college. I did the typical college, like you mentioned, like I was the beer chugging girl. We did we did the college the way people, and unfortunately it shouldn't be, but that's really, the idea of the over drinking and how to be social. And then I got married. And I married a dentist. You and I are both in the dental industry. This is not specific to dental, but I married a dentist who socially was very much an introvert. He was very technically smart, but very much an introvert. And so in order to go to events, social events, the way to help him and the way to have us both be able to go to an event was a lot of pre-party to lower the nerves. And it became part of our story. 20 years of being married and drinking for events, concerts, like you mentioned, kids things, amusement parks, wherever there was alcohol, if there was there, it made it more fun. And it really became part of our story. Had two children, raised the children in suburbia world where, there's mommy mimosa mornings and play dates and get the kids together for trick-or-treating so we can carry our hot chocolate spikes.
Hot toddies.
Yeah. We did the whole social thing. And a few times throughout my marriage, I would sit down and have a serious discussion with him saying, I think we have a problem. I think we need to stop. I think we're drinking too much. And his response usually was, if you think you're drinking too much, you should stop. If you think it's not, it's his problem, it's my problem. And every time we tried to do the 30-day prove to myself, I don't have a problem, right? I would make it to day 21, 22, felt great and thought, see, I don't have a problem, and would start drinking again. And
yep.
So that was kind of my 20-some year story of drinking. It was separated, didn't plan it. Of course, nobody does. And here I am now in my 40s, living alone, pretty much adult children, 17, 18 years old, adult children. And nobody's holding me accountable to what I do or don't do. And so by myself, living in a time when I was quite depressed, mimosas in the morning seemed normal. And then meeting a girlfriend for lunch and having some beers and then grabbing a bottle of wine at nighttime. And next thing you know, it became part of my story regularly.
Yeah. I mean, if you had a life like I had, you would drink too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, I was by myself and my kids. I mean, for those who've been through this, and I hope this never happens to people, but my kids are over with the ex and the new girlfriend, and I'm just like bearing my sorrow in a bottle. Right.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm in the dental industry, like we talked about with you, and I travel a lot. I go to a lot of conferences. And so you go to the airport, that is the number one place to drink at 6 a.m. Why not? Do you want a shot with that beer? Sure. Yeah.
5 o'clock somewhere.
Exactly. Get upgraded to first class. Oh, good. That means I get to drink all the way across country, get to the other side, meet at the hotel. The party's already started at the hotel, walk into the bar. I was the first one at the social event and the last one to leave. And it just became part of every day for
Yeah.
me. And everything about my life fell apart, but then everything about my life started to rebuild. I met my new husband. My kids are doing great. I moved to a new area, a new community. Like everything about my life started coming back together, even better than I could ever imagine. The problem was I was still the problem. Like no matter where I showed up, I showed up. And what I mean by that is when I was with my husband, I didn't drink as much because we're newly together and he doesn't drink and I didn't want to, but I would go to the conferences and drink more. When I was alone, I would justify drinking. If I was going to go shopping, I would sneak off and have a glass of wine. And so what I realized was many times sitting there guilt ridden in my head, thinking this is not me. Right. But I can't do without it. I don't know how to do without it because I've always had it as my crutch, right?
So did you
And
have a pivotal moment at a certain point?
yes. And so that's where, so I went to a conference. It's actually the same conference you and I met at or had this epiphany together, but years before, 3 years before. And at that conference, I drank quite a bit. And, we were all hanging out, drinking and stuff. Woke up the next morning and I was supposed to speak on day 3. And on day 2, they asked me if I could speak a day early. And I couldn't put a complete sentence together because I had planned not to drink as much that night because I was speaking the next day. But the night before, I didn't plan it. My career is speaking. I'm a speaker in the industry. I couldn't even do my job. And I thought, I'm not going to let this happen. And this is the end of the year. So New Year's resolution, we all have one. New Year's resolution, awesome. And I go to the next conference. It's week 3 in January. And here I do it again. It's happy hour and there's all of the stuff. People are buying drinks. And the next morning I'm feeling, and I'm like, I can't even make it 3 weeks in January. And there was a lady who stood on the stage that you and I both know, who at that point she was sober. And she told a story about how her best friends were Ben and Jerry and Chardonnay. And she
I
realized
love
she had a
that.
problem. I know, right? She realized she had a problem and she decided she needed to get sober. And for me to hear somebody just one step ahead of me, just somebody I respected in my industry who could stand on stage and tell that story, right then I thought, if she can do it, I could do it. Like if she can do that, it's not like I see celebrities out there. It's not. And the issue was for me was I didn't consider myself an alcoholic. I didn't see myself going to AA. I was functioning, right? I had a great career. I had a great life. And then I heard a TED talk about because I started doing some research. I'm like, if she could do it, I could do it. I heard a TED talk about gray area drinkers, and that resonated with me. That is somebody who, in my mind, an alcoholic was somebody who that was the last chance. You are just down and out. I hadn't gotten there, right? I never got a DUI. I never got fired. But this gray area drinking for me was the aha. I'm like, that is my problem. And much
I
like you.
like that term so much more than high functioning. I've always talked about myself as being high functioning because what that means to me is I didn't have a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But gray area,
Yep.
that really gives a little bit more of a perspective of like, it's not sunshine, it
Yep.
is gray,
Yep.
but it might not be black.
Right. Not, yeah. And so and not to jump ahead of my story, but over my story, I've done a lot of research I've been sober now since 2020. So I'm only 4 years in, almost 4 years in. Unlike your
Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. But in my research, what I've learned is I thought alcohol was you are or you aren't, right? I grew up, unlike you, I grew up in a family where my family said, be careful, there's alcoholism, be careful, we have alcoholics, be careful. But nobody was sober. Like so I was like, you are or you aren't. You go to the doctor and they're like, do you drink? And you're like, a couple glasses of wine, which of course that's fibbing, but a couple glasses of wine on the weekends. And they're like, oh, you're fine. It's okay. There was no middle ground. And so this gray area for me helped me identify. And what we've learned is it's alcohol use disorder. It's not you do or you don't. It's not how many drinks do you have to have a week to be an alcoholic. It's a spectrum. And I was into the spectrum. Now, where was I in the spectrum? And far enough where for me, my option was I needed to stop drinking. I just
Mhm.
knew I couldn't control it. It's not that way for everybody. And that's really what you and I are trying to bring here is like just to open the discussion. Because the idea is, it's not yes or no. It's a gray area and it's gray for everybody. And so just being conscious about it and knowing, and I knew at that point, if she could do it, I could do it. And so I came home and that was right before the pandemic. And I got sober and then watched everybody else get drunk on social media.
Oh, that's
Which,
awesome.
yeah. So that's my story. That's kind of my
So,
aha.
so COVID was when you were getting sober, but there came a time, since we're really focused on this notion of how do we navigate at business meetings, there came a time when travel started back up again. Do you
Mhm.
remember your first business trip and what that was like?
Yeah, I do. So getting sober during COVID was easy and hard. Like it was easy in the sense that we couldn't go out to restaurants and bars where I would normally, drink at dinner and stuff. I didn't have alcohol in the house, so that was easy. But I didn't learn how to navigate the real world. And then we
Right.
started back into meetings again. And I remember actually, it's one of my best friends in the industry, somebody who pre-COVID I partied with a lot. Now I come out of the pandemic and I'm no longer drinking.
Oh
So
my gosh, that had to have been so awkward.
yeah. And so I go and I was a year and a half, 2 years sober at that point. I go sit down at the bar with this person and I order a fake mojito, one that looks like it's got the mint and everything. And I feel fine with it. And he says, oh, that's right. He knew you don't drink anymore. That's not going to last very, very long. This is going to be hard on you.
No.
To this day, he doesn't know he said it. To this day, he doesn't.
Oh,
He was real with me. He's a good friend, but I thought, wow, thanks for the cheer. Like, thanks for
I'm
the,
so
yeah.
sorry.
So that night he hosted a party, an after event party in the room where everybody goes. And I walked in and I thought, this is where I used to like be in my heyday. And now I'm like, I am not comfortable. And so I literally wasn't sure what to do. Everyone's drinking and so I had a couple conversations and then I realized, I don't know, 45 minutes in, I'm like, most of these people don't even notice if I'm here or not. Most of these people, they're on to their second or third drink.
Yep.
I'm gonna slip out and see what happens. I'm gonna see and I slipped out. I went downstairs. I got myself a big old piece of chocolate cake and a cup of decaf coffee. And I went back to my room and I called my husband and I ate cake and I was proud of it. And so my go-to now is start an event, but if I don't have people to hang out with that I'm comfortable with, I'm going to go get that dessert because why not? I would have drank the calories before. Why not enjoy the dessert in my room? So I
But
kind of learned how to navigate that
you know what's
way.
so interesting about that is that this is the story that I'm starting to hear again and again is that all of us who don't drink or want to drink less, we're going to these events for the first 45 minutes and
Mm-hmm.
then we're bolting for our rooms.
Mm-hmm. And an interesting thing happened at a most recent conference, though, that is kind of the part of our story. And I don't think I've ever even told you the story. I was going to get my piece of cake and I was going back to the room. I went to the coffee shop and somebody passed me who I've known for years. And he said, hey, I got to tell you something. I was like, first time I've seen him in years. He said, I've been sober since Easter. This was maybe September. He said, so I've been sober for like 6 months. And he goes, I have a TikTok following, right? He says, your TikToks are part of my story. And I'm like, what? And he said, I stopped drinking in Easter. He goes, I don't know if I'm ever going to be sober forever, but it's changed my life. I'm so happy now, whatever. Your TikToks like helped. And I was like, wow. He and I sat in the lobby for 2 hours and we talked about business. We talked about networking. We talked about family. We talked about It was the most memorable networking I've had with this gentleman in the 10 years I've known him, which is part of what you and I are talking about trying to change, because there are people to have conversations with. There is networking to be had, but we just need to know, we're not alone, and that there's other people who want to stay and talk and not focus just on the alcohol. So that was a big pivotal change for me, to realize that there's other people involved, having the same scenarios that we have.
One of the things that I was pondering just a month or so ago is, why am I even going to conferences anymore?
Mm.
We've heard across all industries that conferences are struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas it used to be that, yeah, you could find some education online, post COVID, like, we nailed it. We know how to do that now. And you
Mm-hmm.
can get all the industry expertise that you want online. So why am I even going to conferences?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it is the networking.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing to replace FaceTime, and there's nothing to replace having those shared moments and those shared experiences, and even sitting in a conference room watching a speaker and like laughing with a person next to me or passing notes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But those after events, those are where we really build those friendships and learn more about each other personally. And don't we love doing business with people that we know personally?
Mm-hmm. But let's paint a picture on what the after events look like many times. In the last event I went to, pre you and I talking about this, it's my favorite conference of the year. And they take us down to the dark conference room downstairs. I think the event was supposed to be outside, but it got moved downstairs because of the weather. And it's in a hotel, and they roll up the black bars
Yep.
with the white shirt, black pants, bartender behind it. It's in a dark conference room, and they had a very loud DJ that we were yelling over. And the only thing to drink was this bar. Now, I don't count days. I'm not super, like, I've made the decision to get sober, and not that it was easy, but I'm the one of the thing I'm most proud of. But somebody handed me a drink, and I had just ordered, a Coke, or no, I'd ordered like Sprite with club soda and a lime. I put lime in it so that people just leave me alone, right? And somebody handed me a drink, and I took a sip out of it, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think it had alcohol in it. And I handed
Yep.
it back and said, I just want a water. Now, somebody who really is counting days and worried about it, and that would be triggering. And the thing that got me about it is this bartender, he rolls up the bar, he works for the hotel, he's making drinks as fast as possible. There's a line. It's not his fault. It's just a habit. Add vodka, throw some tequila in it, whatever. But that's not okay, right? And the fact that I have to put a lime in it to get people to leave me alone about what I'm drinking. And I had a term that you've come up with, we're going to talk about a lot, a sober wingman next to me, who she said, I'm going to be in charge of your drinks, and I'm going to make sure everything you get doesn't have alcohol in it, because I am very social and I talk, and you can hand me a drink and I won't pay attention. And that's not okay, right? We really need to change that, because we're so alcohol forward at these events that
Yep.
we're not even realizing how hard this is for people who decide or want to drink less or decide not to drink.
Yep. And I've had the exact same experience, only I now watch the bartenders because they're just slammed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't blame them at all, but I watch them to see, when they're making my drink, what goes in there.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yep.
I've had that accidental alcohol put into my drink, and it is a bummer.
Yep.
But what I was saying about the networking is, we're going for that networking, we're going for the fun, we're going for the shared experiences. And what are we doing? We're running for our rooms.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you been able to do since you've been sober that has allowed you to have some kind of interaction with people before that, running for the cake and the decaf?
Well, I will say my biggest win that I've done since coming out from the pandemic is sharing my story. You and I are very different. We laugh about our differences, which is why we are great partners. I have no problem standing on stage. I shouldn't say it. I haven't been on stage yet to say I'm sober specifically. I was on that panel that got us connected, but I have no problem telling people. I have no problem I have no problem being the light so other people can see the way. I have no problem being the one step above, like one step ahead. There are a lot of people who I hope will listen to this and follow along and be included with us, that maybe you don't have to become sober because you actually understand and respect alcohol for what it is, and you learn from this. And I have no problem being that person. I have no problem. So by telling my story, it's good and bad, right? Like, because I hear a lot of people coming up like, oh, I heard you're sober. And I'm like, yeah, what is that? I don't have a label. Like, what is that? But I've
Right.
had a lot of people come up who respect it, honor it. They're my wingmen. They're there to make sure. And they're talking to me about their journeys and their stories. And, if I can give hope to other people like we're doing and guide, then that keeps me going every day. So I guess it's
So
just
because
my story.
so because you have been so open and I haven't, what I would love to know from you is, have you felt anybody judging or stigmatizing you by sharing these things openly?
I would say I have somebody currently who's texting me who's in our industry who is challenged with her drinking, and she asked me about that. She said, what's the stigma like you've had with your business?
Mm-hmm.
I choose to say I'm sober. One of the top 3, 4, 5 things I'm most proud of is my sobriety. Um, Getting sober, deciding not to drink, saying no at an event, it's the hardest thing to do because the amount of peer pressure, right? So no, I haven't, but I also kind of don't care what people think. Like if you have a problem because I don't drink, that's more a reflection on you than me, right? I have had some interesting scenarios. I just actually, we have a social platform that we're going to build. And I just did a video about this, that same as you mentioned it, I believe that as soon as you say, there is adult peer pressure in these meetings, right? And conferences and events. As soon as you say, like, someone's like, do you want a glass of wine? And you're like, no, thanks. And it's, come on, are you sure? Just one glass of wine. That's peer pressure right there. Right.
Yep.
The second thing is why don't you drink? Like, is everything okay? Like, I don't ask you why you don't eat eggs. Like, it's none of your business why I don't drink, right? So there's
Right.
that. I actually had a guy come up to me, and we were at an event. I was standing next to somebody. He came up and he said, can I get you guys a drink? And then he follows me on TikTok, and to the other person, he's like, can I get you guys a drink? And then he looked at me and he goes, oh, sorry. And he backs away. And I'm like, I still drink. I'd love a Coke. I'll have a Sprite. Do you want to make like, I didn't die. It's just, I don't want to put alcohol in my mouth.
Yes.
It's fine, So it's
Yes.
actually quite humorous. That's why I share them on TikTok, because it's humorous what people say and it's not the norm. And that's what we're trying to change. We want it to get to the point where you say no wine. Okay, no, thank you. Cool. And let me get you something else to drink and let it go. It doesn't matter. Let people drink what they want to drink.
Yeah. Well, but it's encouraging though to hear that you haven't had stigma or your business hasn't suffered or any of those sorts of things. Because I think that that's the big fear for so many, including myself for all those years. Like, ooh, don't talk about that. Right.
Mhm.
So,
I think that, excuse me, I think for me, I was not expected to be divorced at 40. My life was the white picket fence, the suburbia mom, the boy and girl, I was married to a doctor, a dentist, right? There's that conflict, but so I had to get over the stigma of being divorced, which that was harder for me, honestly. And I thought, I remember the first time speaking and being not married to the dentist and being just on my own and trying to justify who I was on stage. So getting over that stigma was harder for me than the alcohol. Now, putting down the drink is a hard thing to do for anybody I couldn't imagine what life was going to be like on the other side. I couldn't imagine how to have fun. I couldn't imagine how to go to concerts without alcohol. I didn't know how to do that. And then once you get to the other side, if you choose not to drink, then you got to sit in those feelings. You got to be you. You got to realize that alcohol is not going to be your crutch. So the actual part of getting sober and staying sober is work on a regular basis, but the stigma never really bothered me because I'm more proud of being sober than most things. So why not share it to the world, right?
that's amazing.
I
That's
challenge
amazing.
anybody else to be sober. You try it. It's hard. It's very hard.
Right.
You know,
Yep. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Laura. I did want to just touch on the community that we're building at Sober Life Rocks is a big tent. And we are welcoming people who are sober, but also people who are sober-ish, people who just don't drink that often, but perhaps might raise a glass at a special event. We have room in our tent for people who are sober curious, and we welcome you. Try it out, see what it looks like in your life. You don't have to make a lifelong commitment, but maybe see what it's like. And then, as Laura mentioned, our sober wingmen, those who are supportive of people's choices without having any kind of judgment, one way or the other, what's in your cup. Thank you for joining us on this podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Cheers.